Good morning. I'm Michelle, and I wanted to welcome you to 15 minutes of Unpacking Our Grief Part 2. I chose 15 minutes because a friend of mine once said the mind can only comprehend what the seat can endure. So I'm hoping that 15 minutes of your seat endurance with me will be worth your while. I'm just sharing from my heart. I don't have any script or any outline or anything like that. I really wanted this time to be as authentic as possible, and I want to be as transparent as I'm comfortable with. Just maybe for you to feel supported on your journey towards healing. That something I say may be thought-provoking, or even if you haven't started your journey towards healing, that it will be a catalyst for you to begin to heal. Because I think that we have to be intentional about healing in our grief. We don't have to be in a rush. We don't have to be in a hurry. But I think we have to, at some point, start that process. If not, then we'll become debilitated by it, and we'll stifle and suppress emotions that have the potential to erupt in a harmful way for us. And I can say that from experience because, after my mother passed away, I don't feel like I know I didn't handle her death as well. I lost her, I was 29. And her death anniversary date is coming up in a few days. And I remember that I was just not in the best place in my life. I was engaged in self-destructive behaviors and that just were not conducive for my healing in the grief of losing her and the trauma of her illness and death. And it was years before I really got some help to address some of the issues I had behind losing my mother. And I remember telling the therapist, I was talking to her about the emotions, which is what I wanted to talk to you about. I was telling her that the reason why I self-medicated is because I wanted to be numb. I wanted to stay numb. I didn't want to deal with the emotions because they just were so overwhelming. I described it like an avalanche. You know how in an avalanche, if you ever seen one on TV, or hopefully you haven't experienced one, but first the little rocks start trickling down the mountain, and there are few, but then before you know it, the larger rocks start coming down faster, and then the next thing are the huge boulders that just kind of drop and fall on you. And that's how the emotions felt. It felt like an avalanche of emotions. Before I knew it, I was buried underneath those emotions, and I could not tunnel my way out. And just like in an avalanche, if you survive, most folk have to have help to get out of that pile of debris. And I felt like that's how those emotions were just consuming me. And I didn't have the tools that I needed at the time to figure my way out of that and to process my way out of that. And thank God I was able to get some help. And since then, after losing my father, and now my husband, I want to think that I'm handling it better than I did before. I do know that I know better. And like Maya Angelou once said, she said, when you did what you knew to do then, and when you knew better, you do better. When you know better, you do better. And I'm trying to be better about it. I'm being intentional about my healing, and I want you to be intentional about your healing, because the healing part, no one can do for us. We have to do it ourselves. And it doesn't have to be done alone, but a lot of it is lonely, just because it's the inner work. It's the inner part of us that needs the most healing. And unless we share and reveal what's going on, it's hard for anyone else or anything else to help us. I remember T.D. Jakes wrote a book. It's called Naked and Not Ashamed. I read it years ago. Oh, I love it. If you can find it, get it, read it. It'll help you in your healing. But he said on the front of it, I think he says, I'm paraphrasing, it says, for too long, God's been wanting to heal what we've been afraid to reveal. He wants us to be naked and not ashamed. And I want to say to you that those emotions, you don't need to be ashamed of them or to hide them or to pretend like they don't exist. I've always considered myself to be somewhat of a strong person and able to handle things and deal with things and a lot of things at one time. But those emotions, man, they kicked my butt. And they've kicked my butt since then, especially, in these 8 months of losing my husband. Those emotions there are days where I feel okay, especially now. There are days where I feel almost, I won't say back to normal. What was my normal will never be my normal again. I'm aware of that. But I feel more like myself. And then there are still days where, there's just an overwhelming sadness or there's an overwhelming anxiety that I have to, process and deal with. But there are days where I still cry. And I think it's okay to cry. I remember, telling the counselor after my mother died, I could easily cry for other people. I've always had a very compassionate, sympathetic nature. But I found it hard to cry for myself. And to me, it was embarrassing, really, to cry for myself. And so I didn't want to cry around people. And it was even hard for me to cry alone. Although, man, when those emotions overcome you, you can't do anything but cry. But this time around with my husband, I've been able to cry, and I've given myself permission to cry and not to try to hide those tears. I feel like they're a catharsis, they're a cleansing. I always feel better after I cry, although it can be exhausting, but just emotionally, I feel better. I've called my siblings many times and just overcome with tears. I remember my brother telling me, just go ahead and cry it out. He said, I feel like that's God's way of helping you release that pain that you're feeling, and it's okay. And so I have just sat on the chair and cried. And I want to encourage you to cry if you need to cry for yourself. Release those emotions. They're too heavy to bear. And they're too heavy to suppress and to keep inside. I feel like if we suppress them, it's kind of like when, I'm from the beach. I'm from the East Coast, so I can definitely talk to you about the ocean and the beach. But we used to hold a beach ball under the water, and then when you would let it go, it would just go psh and come flying out the water, and the water would go everywhere, and the beach ball would just go flying. I feel like that's how our emotions will do us. I know that's what happened with me, how our emotions will do us if we suppress them and if we don't go ahead and allow ourselves to feel them, to cry, to do what we need to do to process through those. So I just want to encourage you to allow those emotions out. I know it may feel daunting. It may feel intimidating, especially if you, like me, consider yourself to be a strong person. I know it feels like if you ever start crying, you may not stop crying. And if you don't stop crying for a while, that's okay. I think those tears are just a cleansing time for us. But I feel like you got to start somewhere. So, and what I found, because there are so many emotions, I was looking at this weekend, I've just felt a lot of emotions resurface, things that I felt like I had pretty much been able to manage. I felt those overwhelming emotions of sadness and devastation and anger and helplessness. I felt those emotions witnessing, what's going on with our black brothers and sisters. I'm somewhat traumatized from that. To see senseless murders of of Ahmaud and Brianna and George, to see them just murdered, innocent people, lives taken, having no control or say so, not being able to defend themselves. You know, I watched Mr. Floyd's brother, George Floyd's brother, break down on TV. You know, I can identify with that helplessness that you feel when something happens to someone you love, and you know, if there was any way that you could have protected them, if you could have walked that path for them, you would have, but you can't, and now they're gone, and you can never get that time with them to foreclosure. That was robbed from you, and I feel that when I see him, my heart breaks. My heart is still broken from just all that. I'm sure Breonna Taylor's family is feeling, and Ahmaud Arbery family's feeling, and a lot of you are feeling, and that fresh grief on top of the grief that some of us are already dealing with, man, those emotions, they come, that avalanche, it comes back down. And it's important for us to do what we need to do to be able to process through those emotions, so that we don't again become just buried underneath it. And I hope that you will do that. I know you've heard me talk about therapy. I think therapy is important. I'm trained as a counselor, not a mental health counselor, but I am trained as a counselor, so I know the importance of at least having someone to talk to. I'm hoping that you'll reach out. You can reach out to me if you don't have anyone to reach out to. But I'm hoping that somewhere, somehow, you can reach out to someone close to you or someone you trust that can just be there and be supported. It's not a whole lot that people can say. You know, I find it hard to know the right things to say when, you know, when someone has lost a loved one. It's hard to know what to say. There really are no words to say, but I do know that I have appreciated any words. I've appreciated the cards. I've appreciated folk just sitting with me. I've appreciated that. It has helped me in times where I've just been so overwhelmed. A phone call, to get an encouraging card in the mail. I got one yesterday. It is so helpful and encouraging, and I just want to encourage those of us who are walking with someone through their grief. If you haven't reached out to them in a while, reach out to them. Just say something, do something, a text. Let them know you're thinking about them, and that, you know, no matter how long it's been for them, that you are still praying for them or lifting them up. I know I'm praying for you. In my time in sitting with the Lord, I take the time to pray for widows. I pray for widowers. I pray for those that have lost their parents. I pray for those mothers who have lost their children. You know, I pray for you. I pray for the families of those of Brianna and Ahmaud and George. I'm praying for you, because I know prayer is important, and prayer is what has gotten me through. That my time of sitting with the Lord is partly my prayer time, partly it's my listening time. And I know I'm talking as if all of you have a relationship with the Lord. If you don't, I will just say I wouldn't want to do my grief journey without him. I can't imagine trying to get through the death of my husband and have gotten through the deaths of my mother and my father without the Lord. And I just want to encourage you. I promise you, if you will allow the Lord to introduce himself to you, he will not let you down. He will not disappoint. He will be there for you. And so if there's someone that you know that is a believer, that has a relationship with the Lord, then by all means, reach out to them. And if you don't understand, and if you're somewhat skeptical about it, then take the time to just talk about it and explore. I just encourage everyone, especially on your grief journey, for your healing to be complete. Not that you'll arrive, like I said, not that there's a destination, but for your healing to be complete, I think it's important that you allow the Lord to in on your journey. He won't disappoint. He has not disappointed me. Well, I see I'm over my 15 minutes. I may come back and talk about emotions again. I hope this has been helpful for you in some way. And I want you to know that I'm praying for you. And I believe you're going to make it. God bless you. Bye.